Excuse me. All right. We'll get started in a minute or two. So if you're tuning in live, welcome, welcome. If you're tuning in, it's been recorded. Well, welcome as well. As always, if you want to say hi in the comments, I always love seeing who's out there and where you're tuning in from. I'll give folks another minute or so. I didn't have a chance to uh, make an announcement earlier today, but hopefully people know that by now I'm doing this every day, 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So anyway, so like I said, if you're tuning in and you want to say hi in the comments, I really appreciate that. And yeah, we'll get started in another minute or so. Well, welcome, Francis. It's sunny here in Virginia as well, a little on the chilly side. A couple days ago, it felt like summer. So anyway. How you doing, Ann? All right. There's Bonnie. How you doing, Bonnie? It's still really weird to do like live streams and not be able to see faces and just kind of see messages in the comments. But anyway, so welcome. So glad that you could join me today. Today, I think I'm going to do some cutting and create some windows in different spaces. And so if you've tuned in before, you may have seen this as well. But it's one way. It's a different way of thinking about journaling and thinking about a book. Oftentimes, when we think about a book, we think about like, okay, I'm reading a book. I go from page to page, and we really don't consider how the pages interact. And I think a lot of times with visual journaling and with art journaling, we don't really think about that. We think about each page kind of being its own entity. And I've talked about that the other day as I was starting out, trying to think about how pages transition from one to another, and how just like a story continues from page to page, we can also kind of create that visual story. So today I do want to kind of up that the ante when it comes to that interactivity and sort of how like one page can relate to another. And I really want to start thinking about that now before I get too far into it. Like I was saying yesterday, is that a lot of times I wait too long, and then I get a lot of stuff on the pages, and then it's really difficult to find a good space or an appropriate space to cut windows or to create page cuts or tears or things like that. So that's where I'm going to start. I haven't really thought too much else about kind of where I'm going to go from after where I'm going to go after I do that. But as usual, what happens is as I get to work, then the ideas start to flow. Today has been a busy day, so I've just finally had a chance to sit down like right now and kind of think about this. And as far as I've gotten is just sort of thinking about cutting some windows and some what I call transitional spaces. And if you're really interested in that, some of you I know have taken the class that I taught. All of my online workshops are now self-paced, except for the new ones that are coming up. So if you find this really interesting, this transitional spaces and creating this interactivity in the journal, I did a workshop on that, and you can find that on my website. But anyway, let me go ahead and switch this over, and we'll go ahead and dive into it. All right, so I've got my journal. I've got a cutting mat because I'm going to use a craft knife. So I've been, kind of building up layers. And yesterday, whenever I was using the Inktense pencils, I was really thinking about spaces that could get cut out. And so the first thing I'm going to do is turn to this page. So I'm going to definitely cut that one. I think I'm going to cut both of these out. And then I created this space here. I'm going to cut that out. but I think I'll start with this one first. Now, I do have to be careful because number one, this paper is really thick. So it should be easy enough to cut through just the paper, but right here where I want to cut through, I have actually glued in the security envelope, so that's even thicker. So I have a little cutting mat. I have a little black mat that it's put away right now, but it's great for traveling. It's not actually not a cutting mat, it's a setting mat for setting eyelets and grommets and such. But anyway, so if I just take my cutting mat, stick it underneath, then I can cut through that without much problem. One of the things is whenever I notice that this square here is bigger than this one, and so I think I want to cut this a little bit bigger, and then that way they're just a little bit more even. I have I put a brand new blade in this today because I used it earlier and I know it's really dull. Having a nice sharp knife is definitely the way to go. I know some people kind of get scared of that, but the reason that you want to have a nice sharp knife in your craft knife is that you don't have to press so hard and you don't have to force it so much. And that is, when you force it, that's when you can slip, and that's probably when you can do the most damage, because you really are forcing it, and then when you slip, of course, then you kind of lose control. So yeah, it's a pretty thick paper. Okay, so that came out nice, and then do the same thing. Down here is going to be a little bit easier to cut through because there's not that buildup of paper. So I tend to do parallel lines first, and then do the, sometimes I'll do the vertical first, sometimes I do the horizontal, but I kind of do the parallel lines. Makes it cut out a little bit easier. Okay. Right here in the corner, I didn't cut all the way. That's the biggest problem that I see for myself and for others, is that you just don't quite cut all the way through. And so it's like hanging on in that little corner. Some people will tear that, and there's such a little bit there that it probably wouldn't matter. But I always want to go back with the knife and cut it, because when you go to pull on it, sometimes you do tear the page. So if it's kind of hanging on, I suggest cutting it, and just that way you don't end up tearing or ripping the page, especially if your paper's thin. This paper's nice and thick. But anyway, just with those two little pieces cut, I like how that's looking through. And, you know, the fuchsia ties together because I use the fuchsia here, but then, you know, it really stands out up here. And then when I flip it this way, so this is why I wanted to wait to cut this part. I had thought that when I drew this, I didn't quite line it up, and I can see that there's that dark blue. So I think when I cut this square out, I'm going to just make it a little bit bigger, because I want this square to look through that square. But anyway, I'm going to save these. I don't like to throw these away. I can reuse them. Actually, I might glue them on here somewhere. So I'll just set those off to the side. And like I said, I'm going to cut that now. This should be pretty easy to cut through. Again, there's nothing underneath, but I'm just going to go ahead and try to make it a little bit bigger. Oh, I didn't cut my parallel lines. Okay. So now that's kind of interesting. So I have, you know, a real light page, and then you have that dark value, makes a nice square, and then you have that little square there. So that I find that it's interesting. You know, got this little bit of text showing through there, and then whenever I turn it, you know, oh, then I see like, oh, that's a hole there. So it's kind of interesting to have it go through multiple pages. I think before I go too much further, I want to go ahead and glue these in. I think I want this. That's kind of interesting. I don't know if you could see it. There's a little line here from the pen that I drew yesterday, day before. And it actually, I can line it right up on here. So I think I'm going to glue that here, there. Maybe that's going to get glued on top. And then, you know, I've got 2 squares here, 2 little squares here. That's kind of interesting. So I'll grab my glue paper, grab my glue stick. I can kind of put that one in there so it lines up too. That's kind of interesting. All right. So while I'm kind of looking at this, there's another way I can really tie these pages together. So yeah, when I look through the little windows, you know, they start to really tie the pages together. I see little, you know, peeks out of it. But when I look in there and I see these lines that just sort of stop, that's kind of interesting. But it'd be really interesting if I take that pen and I continue my lines. So I could do that in 2 ways. So I have the lines on the page, and then I have the lines that are on the page through the little window. So that might be kind of, let me play around with that and see if I can get something going. Okay, so now this line lines up with the line I drew through the window. Same thing here. And then what I can do is I can take and extend the line from the window through. And then do the same thing over here. And then I'm going to turn it back because now I have these kind of random lines here and here. So I just find that interesting that some of those line up, really kind of pulls it together, kind of ties it together. I could go through like here where the circles are. I can cut a window there. I could just cut a random window inside of a page. I tend to kind of go to where I've already drawn something, usually, not always, but sometimes. So I'm looking right now. I want to find a space where I can cut and shape the page. That's another thing I can do. You know, who says that the page has to stay like this? Like, you know, I can cut holes through pages, but why does the page have to stay a rectangle, or in this case, a rectangle with curved corners? So I can think about how I can I'm kind of thinking maybe here. So what my thought is, I want to cut out a shape along the edge, and that's going to shape this page. And then I can take this little part off and I'll glue it here. So then that way, as I'm flipping through it, at first glance, this will look like a solid page. But then when I go to flip the page, there'll be this cutout. And I'm going to use a typical, very typical shape. I love faces. So I'm going to do a profile. So my goal is to have the forehead come down, nose, mouth, and then the chin down here. And it's not anybody in particular, it's just a face. Just the profile. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to see on the map where I drew that. That's all right. I'll figure it out. So always I put my mat underneath just so that I don't cut through pages. And it's a stylized profile, so I'm not worrying about it looking super realistic. And so if I got the proportions off or the shapes off a little bit, that's all right. Yeah, it's really hard to see where I drew. So notice how I'm turning the book. That's the nice thing about the small book is I can turn it as I need to. Okay. And so then when I pull it off, right now it's really kind of hard to see that profile because of the semicircle that's there. So as I'm working later, I'll really think about like, well, actually this is I'm thinking about gluing this down. So you won't be able to see it until it's flipped. So you can kind of see it over here a little bit better. Here it's getting lost, but I'll make sure that I really kind of darken that up. So I'm going to take that and glue this down. Okay. Sorry, I was just checking Facebook there to see if everything was still going and working and stuff, and seeing if anybody had any comments or questions. All right, go ahead and get this glued down. I'm just going to get this glued right down to the edge. So I often just use my fingers or my fingernail to kind of rub collage down. Sometimes I'll flip it over, rub it from the back. So again, that way, as I'm like flipping through it, you know, it's like this might pop up. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. But then I can see that it kind of goes down. I can see some of the pencil marks. I'm going to grab an eraser. I like these click erasers. I don't even know if they still make them. I know I've had this one for a really long time. I do think I want to do something with this right now so that I can really see that profile. Let's see. I think I'm going to turn to this fuchsia. I'm going to get out my Inktense pencils, sharpen it. Sorry for the noise. And so I just want to darken the edge. Now I do want to be careful. There's a part of me that says, oh, maybe I should wait to do this, because since I just glued this down, the glue is still pretty wet. Even though glue stick doesn't have a lot of water in it, it still takes it a little while to dry. And this is a thick piece of paper. So when I go to paint this, some of that water can soak in underneath it and loosen it up, but I think it should be okay. So sometimes I'll use the hair dryer when I collage and I know I'm gonna paint over it or next to it or near it. But even just shading that in, it's more readable as a face. And just try not to use a lot of water. All right, so while I have the pencil out, I'm gonna trace the face over on this page. And that way I can have multiple faces. See, I didn't have to glue this down. Maybe I could have glued that down to another page, or not even glued it down at all. But I really like this there's like 3 profiles. Well, 4 if I count both sides of this. And so it gives me a lot of opportunity to play around with some imagery. I mean, I haven't really used much imagery other than like kind of maps and textures and patterns. But this just gives me something else to play around with. So whenever I'm playing around with words and things like that, it can be really interesting. Maybe I just had a thought like, oh, what would be really interesting to cut out like a little window? What if it was like a little circle for an eye? But I don't know if that would be too sort of cliche or something, but anyway. So what I'm going to do, I'm thinking here. I like how this is really light and it's a different color than this. So, but I want to do something where I can pull out the profile on here. So it's sort of, I kind of feel like since I did this in here, it might be more interesting to kind of do something on the outside here. And I think I got an idea. All right, so I've got a tan, so it should go well with the with that yellow and orange that's on here. So I was just kind of thinking, a lot of times I kind of sit down with like one material and use that. Like yesterday, I used primarily the Inktense pencils. Did a little bit of ink as well, but used mostly the Inktense pencils. The day before that, it was like mostly collage. And I do that a lot, but then I also like how I'm doing today. You know, it's like, even though I was thinking like, oh, I'm going to sit down and work with cutting windows and shapes and such. As I go, then I start to think like, oh, okay, I can add this or that can get glued down there. So, you know, it's like I've not only have I been using the craft knife and cutting stuff, but then, okay, I've been gluing stuff. I use the ink to draw. I use graphite to draw. And now using the Inktense pencils. So just a little bit more kind of multi-dimensional in the approach today. But I don't have like a set formula for like when to do that and how often to do it. But I am really thinking about sort of how pages go together and how they interact. And, you know, that's really the focus of today. And so, you know, that really, yeah, I like that a lot. I like how the face sort of disappears over here. So I probably won't do anything to make this stand out because I think that's part of the surprise. So as that comes over, okay. So when I first started, I kind of was, you know, looking at spaces that I've already drawn in and creating windows. And then here I did a page cut. Of course, this wasn't here before, so I kind of did that on top of something. But now that I'm flipping through, I'm getting, you know, here where I just had some collage the other day. And here I am now. I've got all these blank pages. It might be really interesting to think about, well, what if I cut something out here? So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm just debating, like, do I want to do a circle since I haven't done one yet? I think I do. And I think I'm going to sketch it first. Let's see, maybe I'll have it right in the center. Okay. So when I cut a circle, like I did when I was cutting the face, I'm going to try to turn the book. I know some people have a hard time cutting out a circle very smoothly. So the key for me is I try not to pick up my knife, because if I cut a little bit and then pick up my knife and turn it and then cut some more, I always have to make sure I'm lining it up where I was cutting. And sometimes that's a little bit difficult. With thicker paper, it's even more difficult. So I'm going to kind of start at the top, and I can kind of, I know I can kind of curve around to about a quarter of the circle. And then I can stop, turn the book, but I leave the knife down. So I'm going to start here. And I'm just cutting through a single page, so it's not super thick. I don't have to press super hard. But if I leave the knife in the paper and turn, the only problem is that cutting mat's a little bit big. It's kind of pushing. I've got a bunch of materials over there and it's just pushing them around. Like I said, I do have that little mat. I should have gotten that out. And that fits more kind of right underneath, makes it a little bit easier to do this. But there I do. There I go. All right. So now I can play around with this if I wanted to. Maybe this becomes a template that I trace. So because I don't have anything on here, it doesn't make sense to glue it in. Maybe I will paint it or do something with it. But I could use it as a template. Since I have like this circle here, I could trace it and then use it over and over again. So then that kind of oval circle form shape can be repeated as I go throughout. Oops. Uh-oh, my eraser came out. Sometimes when I have windows like this, it's interesting to take some paint. I think I'm gonna use a little bit of this orange here. So I'm gonna paint this space, including the window. And then when I do that, I don't want to have a lot of paint that bleeds underneath. And of course, with real liquid watercolor paint, that can happen. So if I kind of drag it, so if I kind of pull it into that hole, it's less likely to kind of get pushed underneath that circle. But once I know that, okay, I'm running out of paint, I don't have as much water, then yeah, I can come around and paint that, and hopefully not a lot of the water is running underneath. But if it does, that's all right. So what that does is that, first of all, it kind of helps hide the circle. It's starting to curl a little bit, so the circle is a little bit easy to see, but excuse me. But after it dries and it's kind of squished flat a little bit, you know, as I'm flipping through, you know, it's an orange background. But then when I flip it, I've got that orange circle there, which is kind of interesting. So I'm going to dry this with a hair dryer, and then I'll kind of talk about what I might do on this side. So let me go ahead and hit mute. Okay, so anyway, I've got that, and then so now when I turn it, so now I have that circle there. So if I wanted to paint this a different color though, and I'm thinking I've got some yellow in here that might be interesting. Maybe I don't want to have a circle there like I have one here. So I need to like protect that. So I'll usually just grab a piece of paper. Here's just one of those index cards and just stick it underneath. And then that's just going to act as just a little shield, a little, you know, it's just going to block that off. But I don't want this yellow bleeding underneath, just like I didn't want the orange bleeding underneath. So it's kind of that similar process. Kind of dragging it into the center. So I kind of have a little decision to make. If I wanted to, I could paint the yellow over the orange. And then whenever I looked at it from the page before, I could see that like, oh, wait a minute, that orange circle there, there's an orange circle there. It's a little bit different than the rest of the page. But I think I want to keep the orange, at least for right now, keep it the same. So it sort of gets hidden. Okay, and when I flip that back, so then that way the yellow got here, didn't get here. And so as I'm working through this more, you know, then I have this space now. I have these two circles, you know, and kind of how do they relate? So I still have lots of blank pages, but I'm not too worried about them right now. I'm not the type that goes through and does every step to every page. I always like to leave some pages there kind of just for the possibility. So just as usual, just kind of going to flip through, start to see what I find a lot of times as I'm flipping through, that's when I'll be like, oh, I know, I'll do this. Oh, I'll do that. So I'll get ideas about what I can do. And especially since yesterday, I was kind of thinking, I started that thinking process, reflecting on my theme. So if I have that list, or if I'm kind of thinking about those things, sometimes as I'm going through, I'm like, oh, that would be perfect to put that word there. Or, oh, I've got this picture that I can use to go there. So, you know, some pages I didn't really touch today, but I might decide like, oh, well, do I want to go back with some paint? I have my paint out. I have my Inktense pencils. I'm just looking at this, and I did some orange. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh, maybe I want to have a little bit of orange over here. Okay. See here, I can, because this isn't developed very far, I could see like words or something being here right now. Whether that's how it will be, I don't know, but at least it's kind of like just looking through, kind of getting those ideas. I don't want to put the words in yet. Maybe that's something that will come up tomorrow. But um, anyway, so I think that's going to kind of wrap it up for me today. I think I've gotten a few good things in there today. So anyway, yeah, so I'm gonna wrap it up. Yeah, so I'll be back tomorrow. I'm not really sure what I'll do. It's one of those things where I kind of take it day by day, and sometimes I give it a lot of thought, or sometimes I just kind of have a inkling of what I'm going to do, and I sit down and just sort of see where the day will take me. But it's really interesting. It's like this is only the fourth day of doing it, and I've been doing it about 45 minutes, I guess, each day, if that. So it's amazing how quickly these little books kind of start getting filled up. So sometimes when people are like, oh, I just don't have the time, it's like, if you can spend 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, especially working small, it's like things add up pretty quickly. But anyway, I appreciate you tuning in and watching and listening to me, and hopefully you're getting some good ideas, or maybe you're just kind of appreciating the time to come and make some art. But if you have questions, comments, concerns, please, pop them in the comments, and I'll try to address them. But yeah, so thank you so much again, and really appreciate you being here and taking time out of your schedule to visit with me and make some art with me. So anyway, I'll be back tomorrow, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And until then, thank you so much and happy creating.